land prices have been driven up to such an extent that now even the smallest possible working farms are affected by this and would have to pay inheritance tax, which would result in the selling of the farms, which means you lose the entire farming community in this country. The government has done this based on figures which includes everything as small as hobby farms and allotments as farms in their figures, which is complete rubbish, really. And so it won't be 70% of farms that are not affected. It will be no working farms that are not affected by this. And so all you'll get in the end is land bought up by developers and the massive tax dodgers that in theory they are trying to counteract with this. And so it's doom for every farmer in this country. We will lose our farm.
December 2025. Government officials are confronting a crisis they never anticipated. British farmers are abandoning their land in unprecedented numbers rather than planting for the 2026 growing season. The statistics are alarming. 3,840 farmers have announced they will not plant spring crops in 2026, representing 11% of Britain's arable farming capacity. An additional 287,000 acres of productive farmland will lie fallow next year, representing a 23% reduction in cultivated acreage. What's shocking government ministers isn't just that farmers are walking away, it's the realization that this abandonment is permanent, irreversible, and will create food shortages that no amount of imports can fully replace. Britain is watching its agricultural capacity disappear in real time. The abandonment that caught everyone off guard, early December 2025, when the Department for Environment surveyed farmers about their spring 2026 planting intentions, the results were catastrophic. Approximately 3,840 farmers, 11% of Britain's arable farming operations, indicated they would not be planting any crops for the upcoming season. An additional 6,200 farmers reported they would reduce planted acreage by an average of 46%. The total impact meant that approximately 287,000 acres of land that produced food in 2025 would lie completely fallow in 2026, representing a 23% reduction in Britain's cultivated farmland. This acreage typically produced around 2.1 million tons of wheat, 840,000 tons of barley, and substantial quantities of vegetables. The loss represented the largest peacetime agricultural contraction in British history. The farmers choosing abandonment over bankruptcy.
To be honest, I mean, I didn't really think about it until you actually contacted me about this interview, and then I thought, do you know what? It actually has been a massive worry. In fact, I even looked into getting life insurance to insure my life, and I can't get life insurance because I had a heart condition, and that was one way I thought I might be able to cover up my kids. Sorry. It is a worry for everyone who's farming, you know, trying to keep a farm going in itself, and then thinking this on top. Sorry, I'm gonna have to stop.
That's okay, yeah, take a breather.
Robert Henderson operates 680 acres in Cambridgeshire that his family has farmed since 1923. In November, he decided to plant nothing for spring 2026 and seek off-farm employment. His calculation was brutal but rational. Planting spring wheat would cost £680 per acre for seeds, fertilizer, pesticides, and fuel, totaling £462,400. Based on current conditions, he would harvest crops worth approximately £520,000, generating a gross margin of £57,600 before accounting for land costs and equipment. I can't afford to lose another £40,000 farming, Robert explains. That's what happened in 2025. I'd rather leave fields empty and work at the agricultural supply company for £32,000 annually. At least that's guaranteed income rather than guaranteed losses. Sarah Mitchell runs 520 acres in Lincolnshire, specializing in vegetables. Planting her typical rotation would require £427,000 in operating costs, with expected revenue of £394,000, representing a projected loss of £33,000. "I've farmed for 23 years and never thought I'd leave land idle," she says. But the economics are undeniable. Farming loses money. Not farming loses less money. The government officials realizing the implications. December 8, 2025. When senior government officials were briefed on the scale of land abandonment, the meeting became tense as implications became clear. The 287,000 acres being abandoned represented not just 1 year's lost production, but potentially permanent loss. Farmland that lies fallow deteriorates, soil quality declines, drainage systems fail, equipment rusts, and agricultural knowledge atrophies. Environment Secretary Emma Reynolds reportedly asked, "If these farmers don't plant in 2026, will they ever farm again?" Agricultural economists responded that the vast majority would not. Once farmers find alternative employment and allow land to deteriorate, barriers to restarting become insurmountable. The 287,000 acres would likely remain out of production permanently, representing a 23% permanent reduction in Britain's food production capacity. Prime Minister Keir Starmer sat in silence after hearing projections. "So we're watching British agriculture die," he finally said. "Not gradually over decades, but right now, this planting season." The statement captured the existential nature. This wasn't a temporary setback, but a potentially irreversible transformation. The food security crisis becoming inevitable.
These are just some of the fields that produce the UK's food, but the farmers that work them are concerned that in a crisis like war or another pandemic, what they harvest won't be enough.
We are saying that as a country, we are criminally underprepared in terms of food security. There is complacency on behalf of the government, and there is an assumption that farmers will just keep producing food. We have no plan what we do in the event of a crisis. There is nothing there. We're just leaving it entirely to the free market. We're not doing that with defence. We shouldn't be doing it with food.
The pandemic was the first time in decades that shoppers saw empty shelves. But if it happened again, could we feed ourselves without relying on imports? And it's fruit and vegetables that we struggle growing the most. Just 1% of farmland is used to grow them. And as a result, Britain grows only 15% of its own fruit and 53% of its vegetables.
The abandonment creates immediate food security problems that will manifest throughout 2026. Britain typically produces 14.8 million tons of wheat annually. The abandoned acreage would normally contribute 2.1 million tons, meaning domestic wheat production could fall to 12.7 million tons, a 14% decline. But Britain consumes 14.2 million tons annually, creating a shortfall of 1.5 million tons, requiring additional imports. Barley production faces a similar crisis. The abandoned land typically produces 840,000 tons, representing 12% of Britain's total barley output. This barley is essential for livestock feed and brewing. Vegetable production from abandoned acreage represents roughly 18% of Britain's domestic fresh vegetable supply. Britain's food self-sufficiency ratio, currently around 52%, would fall to approximately 47% if the abandoned land isn't cultivated, meaning the nation would import 53% of its food. Defense officials view this declining self-sufficiency as strategic vulnerability, making Britain dangerously dependent on international food markets and trade routes. The economic consequences. Rippling through rural areas, the land abandonment triggers severe economic consequences in rural communities. Each acre taken out of production eliminates approximately 340 pounds in annual economic activity when accounting for farming revenue plus supporting businesses. The 287,000 abandoned acres therefore represent approximately 97.6 million pounds in lost annual rural economic activity. In parts of Lincolnshire, Norfolk, and Cambridgeshire, where abandonment rates exceed 30% of local farmland, the economic shock is comparable to major industrial plant closures. Agricultural equipment dealers report sales declining 67% as farmers stop purchasing machinery. Veterinary practices are closing as livestock populations shrink. Rural unemployment in heavily agricultural counties has surged to 14.8%. compared to national average of 4.3%, representing a 245% differential. The government response that came too late.
Families who farmed their land for centuries, elderly men in tears, children worried about their parents, all of them worried that their way of life is about to be destroyed. What would the Right Honourable Lady like to say to them?
We are absolutely committed to our British farmers, and that's why we've committed £5 billion to the farming budget over the next 2 years. That's the largest ever amount for sustainable food production in the UK. His party couldn't even get the money out the door for farmers, failing to spend over £300 million on farming budgets. The farmers know they ruined it for them, and that's why we're in government and they're not.
Well, perhaps the Right Honourable Lady thinks that everyone came to London yesterday to thank the government.
December 10th, 2025. In a desperate response to the abandonment crisis, the government announced an emergency £340 million spring planting incentive program, offering grants averaging £8,850 per farm to farmers who committed to planting at least 85% of their normal acreage. The program was designed to prevent land abandonment by offsetting some operating costs, but the response was immediately criticized as inadequate and poorly timed. The £8,850 average grant covered only 13% of typical operating costs for spring planting. For Robert Henderson in Cambridgeshire facing £462,400 in costs, the grant would provide perhaps £12,000, leaving him still facing £450,400 in expenses for crops likely to lose money. Moreover, the program was announced on December 10th when many farmers had already made final decisions about spring planting and in some cases had already sold equipment or secured alternative employment. Offering incentives after farmers have already decided to abandon land is like offering flood insurance after the house is underwater, one farming representative observed. The political crisis exploding.
Farming
Crisis triggered severe political consequences. Opposition parties characterized it as definitive proof of the government's catastrophic agricultural policy failures. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch stated, "This government has presided over the largest peacetime loss of agricultural capacity in British history. 3,800 farmers are abandoning land their families worked for generations. That's not policy failure, that's national suicide." Rural Labour MPs were equally scathing. Emma Richardson, representing Taunton Deane, issued a statement. "My constituents are watching farmland that produced food for centuries lying abandoned because this government refused to provide adequate support when it mattered. I cannot defend this." By December 12th, 28 of the 35 Labour Rural Research Group members had publicly criticized the government's handling of the abandonment crisis.